This is FTN. We now join coverage of the launch of Artemis 1, already in progress.
We will continue to collect and share those photos. So again, if you have a NASA moon snap, just use that hashtag. Okay, Artemis 1 comes amid a very busy year and exciting year at NASA. Some of the highlights include 2 more commercial crew launches with SpaceX, Crew 4 in April, and then Crew 5 last month. In May, NASA and Boeing flew OFT-2, the second uncrewed flight test of the Starliner capsule. The goal is to certify the capsule for regular flights to the International Space Station after a crewed flight test next year. In July, we released the first images captured by our James Webb Telescope, and oh my, those are really beautiful, fascinating photos, and they're going to really help us answer some of astronomy's biggest questions about how our universe began. And then in September, we intentionally slammed the DART spacecraft into asteroid Dimorphos. Boom, look at that. And we successfully changed its course. The asteroid wasn't headed for Earth, but the test was to show we could defend our planet if needed. And recently, 2 other missions that benefit the Artemis program. Last week, we tested a new inflatable heat shield that could help us eventually land humans on Mars. And just 2 days ago, Capstone arrived at its intended orbit around the moon. The small satellite launched from New Zealand in June and will now test a unique lunar orbit for a future space station there.
Artemis 1 heralds a new era in the history of human spaceflight. It marks a pivotal next step in humanity's return to the moon, ushering in a new generation of astronauts, technology, and research. This critical flight test sets the course for a bright future at the moon. It represents our ability to safely send Artemis astronauts and critical hardware to lunar orbit. Humanity will experience Artemis in different ways than we did Apollo. We will explore new areas of the moon with 21st century materials, technologies, systems, and operations. Gateway will be humanity's first space station to orbit the moon, built with next-generation technology. Gateway will not only provide a deep space outpost for future lunar expeditions, it will also serve as a station for landers, experiments, and supplies. Starting with the core power and habitation elements, Gateway will grow with increasing capability as international partners contribute new habitat and refueling modules, observation windows, external robotics, and more. Gateway will enable longer stays and more science to be conducted on and around the moon than ever before. And one day, it will help set the stage for missions to Mars. A highly skilled, diverse core of astronauts will be selected for Artemis missions, including the first woman and first person of color to step foot on the moon. Aboard Gateway, the crew will conduct exciting research from their unique deep space vantage point. Gateway will also be a transfer station for astronauts to board innovative human landing systems that will ferry them to and from the lunar surface for exciting scientific expeditions near the South Pole. Once on the moon, Artemis astronauts will use expertise in fields like biology and geology to conduct groundbreaking research in modern spacesuits using advanced tools. They will drive new rovers to investigate the lunar terrain and unlock some of the greatest mysteries of our solar system. Artemis 1 cements our capability to send astronauts and cargo to the moon for years to come. We're going back to the moon. We are Artemis.
As we approach the opening of our 2-hour launch window, we have a special musical performance for you. America the Beautiful, played in honor of the flight test by the Philadelphia Orchestra and Yo-Yo Ma. A truly beautiful performance. It really has me feeling quite emotional right now.
Yeah, perfect tribute for tonight's launch.
You know, it's just, it gives me a sense of pride, really, to just remember that our country continues to lead our nation in space exploration. So, and as such, the White House is closely watching this historic launch. Earlier this year, Vice President Kamala Harris came down to Kennedy Space Center and met with NASA leadership as well as astronauts. She also toured our facilities where teams are working on hardware for future Artemis missions. Before leaving, she signed a piece of the Orion spacecraft that will fly on Artemis 3. She's doing it right there, which will return astronauts to the lunar surface. Okay, Kayla, time for more social questions. So let's take the first one. You know now the drill. It's going to be a celebrity question, so let's take that.
Hey guys, I'm Jack Black and I'm super excited for the Artemis 1 launch today. I was part of a little movie called Apollo 10.5, A Space-Age Childhood, and I have a few burning queries. Question the first. How is Artemis different than Apollo?
Artemis is different than Apollo because we're returning to the moon, but this time we're going to stay. So rather than a short visit where we can do some amazing science, but it was pretty limited by these short visits, kind of a small area of the moon, we're going to the South Pole and we're going to learn how to live there long term. So we're going to be building habitats, we're going to have rovers, we're going to have all of this infrastructure on the moon supporting scientific discovery, but also that next big step to Mars.
I love seeing celebrities also take part and ask questions because it really shows that this is something that's captivating a lot of people. So that was really fun to see Jack Black. Also, Query the First. That was funny. All right, let's go to the second question. How does it feel in space?
Being in space is amazing. I mean, for us launching to orbit around the Earth and then go to the space station where I just was for 6 months, we're in an apparent microgravity environment. So for us, it feels like we're weightless, like we're floating. So you have to relearn how to live and work in that space. But once you get used to it, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we were just talking, Jessica Watkins, another NASA astronaut, was just here. And she was saying that actually when you came back on Earth, that was an adjustment as well because you got so used to living on the space station.
Yeah, the transition home was actually a lot harder for me than the transition up there because our vestibular systems kind of remap. We start ignoring all the sensors in our inner ear that tell us how our bodies are moving because the space environment is so strange. But we really need that on Earth to balance and control our bodies.
Sure.
So when we get back, it takes a couple of days before we feel comfortable again.
Really interesting. Thanks so much for those. Okay, so we are 10 minutes until the opening of
on the mobile launcher that feeds into liquid hydrogen core stage tank. That's been resolved. The leak has been fixed, and we're moving forward. Currently, the upper stage of the rocket for liquid hydrogen is roughly 78% at the moment. So that is tracking. Progress continues there. The core stage has been topped off, and now both liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen are 100%, along with the upper stage of the liquid hydrogen side of the equation. So we're just waiting on the complete tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen. Now, with regards to the range issue that we had, we just got an update from the range, the 45th Space Wing officer reporting in to the NASA test director that the Ethernet switch has been replaced. This problematic switch took down their ability to see radar from one of their assets, which is key in getting acquisition and signal for the flight termination system if it were to be needed. Of course, this is a critical system that has to be tested before we can launch. So at the moment, we're looking still at a 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time launch, but it is pretty clear from the work that is ahead that it looks like we're going to slip into that window. How much exactly, we don't have an accurate calculation from the launch team as of right now. But of course, we're anticipating that. So for the moment, you see on your clock now, we are in the T-minus 10-minute hold. We just entered that, and now roughly we're looking at 28 minutes to resume terminal count. The launch team will assess what work needs to be done, how that syncs up with the range getting back online with their equipment, and then we should have a new T0 for you soon. That's the latest from Firing Room 1 here at the Kennedy Space Center. Megan, back to you.
So things are obviously still very dynamic. We're going to come back to Daryl as much as possible. Now, to understand where we are going, we have to know where we have been. To do that, we spoke to some of the special few who walked on the moon and those who sent them.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
It's been 50 years since we've been to the moon, and we've got a great program called Artemis. We're going back. The Apollo program was a test for the American people that you can do what you set out to do. All it took was turning to it and making it happen.
We are go for a mission to the moon at this time.
Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2. All engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff 49 minutes past the hour.
I think the characteristics that I remember most, though, that Saturn V was the noise. The noise was enormous, and it was almost impossible to communicate.
We're go, train type, we're go.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
The landing to me was a great celebration. The nation was almost euphoric.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
There are so many things that we could eventually learn about our universe and the spacecraft that we use exploring.
We are a nation of explorers. During Apollo, we were on national TV literally every day because we were doing something visible that Americans could see and they could feel and say, look what we are doing. And I believe Artemis is going to come up and say, look what we are capable of and what we are doing now.
Artemis will stand on the shoulders of Apollo. They're going to have the eyes of the world on them when they start down this trail.
The science of a space flight is one that will continue to inspire. Going to the moon generates technology, more communications, more computer technology, more sophistication in manufacturing that help us in everyday life.
We have a generation that is ready, a generation with that technology, a generation with the education. Artemis represents the future in space. It is our next big step, and it is time to take it.
If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we are showing you a live look of another visitor center. This is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. Wow, take a look at all of those people who are there hoping to watch the launch today. You know, this is the visitor center for the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. That center played a crucial role in contributing to the Artemis program, so I'm not surprised that there are a bunch of people there watching. All right, so now we're going to take go back to Leah Martin over at Banana Creek. Again, that's right outside of our visitor center, and she's with some other folks who came out to watch today's launch.
Yeah, you know, Megan, we talked about this being America's rocket, right? Every state in the United States has contributed to this rocket, so it should be no surprise that we have people from all over the country joining us here tonight. I'm actually joined by some friends of ours who are joining us from Georgia and Utah. What does it mean to be here tonight to see tonight's launch?
I think it's amazing. I know that tons of people from all over the United States have helped build the rockets and are here tonight, so it's awesome to know that we all have a little bit of personal ties to the rocket.
And go ahead.
No, I'm just excited to be here because I've been a fan of space travel and going to the moon and back, and I'm glad to see it's happening again later in life.
And you were actually telling me a little bit earlier that you grew up in the Apollo era in those years following those first launches, and now here, how does it feel to be watching the sister program launch and seeing at the beginning?
Look at the goosebumps. That tells it all right here. I'm totally thrilled to be here.
Now, and you were actually telling me that you have a personal connection to this rocket as well. You know some people who have worked on it. What do you think it feels like being here? How does it feel for you to see something that's the culmination of so many years of hard work?
Yeah, I think it's crazy when you think about how long it takes to build it and stuff. Like, I wasn't even born last time people tried to get to the moon. So it's awesome. I think it's so exciting, and I cannot wait.
And we have a ton of people who are working tonight still on console. We just want to tell them words of encouragement. What more do you have to say?
Oh, I hope it goes tonight.
Megan, back to you.
Go Artemis.
Woo!
Go Artemis. Yes, I love that. And again, I just love these drone shots that we're showing of all the people who are here ready, hoping, anticipating launch today. So now let's head back over to Dan. So Dan is in the Apollo Saturn V Center, which is right next to this crowd that you're seeing here. He's inside there, and he's going to tell us more about SLS using an interactive state-of-the-art tool we're calling the Moonboard.
That's right, Megan, and everybody, welcome back to the Moonboard. So just to recap, SLS out on the pad, on the mobile launcher. Daryl's been walking you through all of the tanking, all of the preparation. We had that hydrogen leak that was in the base of the mobile service structure here. That's been remedied. We haven't had any issue with those tail umbilicals that we were tracking so closely back in August and September. So everything looking really good with SLS. Just to recap, most powerful rocket we have ever built. It's propelled by 2 solid rocket boosters and 4 engines on this core stage. Now these solid rocket boosters are going to be firing for the first roughly 2 minutes of the flight, a little more than 2 minutes. And we call them solids because of the type of propellant in there. If you forgot it already, it's aluminum powder, ammonium perchlorate, and polybutadiene acrylonitrile. It's a binding agent that's inside. Solid propellants are extremely stable. They're very reliable. But once you ignite them, they're going to keep burning. You can't really throttle them up and down like you can with liquid-fueled engines. You can throttle just based off of the distribution. So you basically put more propellant in some areas and less in others as you're trying to really throttle the rocket down, which we do as we go through things like max Q, maximum dynamic pressure. And just a reminder, as these things are firing, they can steer, they can gimbal. The bottom part here, gimbal just means you can really direct, and they're providing 90% of the steering as SLS is making the flight uphill, and more than 75% of the thrust with those 2 firing at the same time. And again, they're attached to this. This is the core stage, 212 feet tall, the largest single stage we've ever constructed. It's been through the green run test, a lot of preparation for this flight today, and it is propelled by these 4 RS-25 engines. Now, these are liquid-fueled rocket engines, so you have a fuel and an oxidizer, and one of the great things about liquid fuel is you can throttle them in real time. You could kind of like the gas in your car, you can go faster or a little bit slower. So these throttle up to 104% of their rated thrust at the time of liftoff. We throttle them down as we go through max Q, so the maximum amount of pressure on SLS in the way uphill, and then throttle them back up until they've consumed all of their propellants. And they're consuming that propellant at more than 1,500 gallons a second. That is just an astronomical amount of fuel that's running through these engines to produce that thrust. Each of these up to 500,000 pounds each during their operation. And of all the different components, we've got this engine block section down here. You have all of the associated plumbing, everything to feed those propellants down to these engines. You also have these 2 attachment points here, and that's where we actually tank the SLS rocket. So a lot of focus on those in the previous attempts. They've cooperated spectacularly so far today, and we've been able to fully tank this core stage. And a reminder, you have a fuel, about 500,000 gallons right here of liquid hydrogen, and then an oxidizer. You need those 2 together, and then an ignition source. That's what gives you your reaction, your thrust, your basically controlled explosion that then comes out of those rocket engines. So fully tanked, these are cryogenic fuels, hundreds of degrees below zero, so we've got a spray-on insulation across the entire vehicle. As it's sitting out there in the Florida air, it's a little bit warm tonight, but we need to keep those hundreds of degrees below zero. It takes a lot of energy to do that, so the less you have to use to keep them cold, the better, which is why we have that insulation. So we're going to be seeing SLS take flight for the first time tonight as we clear all of those final issues. Again, this is going to be one heck of a show when this thing launches into the night sky. So with that, send it back over to you, Megan.
If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center for live launch coverage of Artemis 1. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. It's been great having you these past 2 hours.
It's been so awesome to be here for this historic launch tonight.
So right now, we are awaiting a new T0. The launch team had to work through some issues, and they're doing a great job at working through those issues. So now we're just waiting to see a new T0, since we had been aiming for the top of the launch window, which opened or would does open at 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time. Now, today is a big deal. Apollo 17 in 1972 was the last time humans stepped foot on the moon. That the rocket you see right there behind us, illuminated in the darkness there, is the first step back towards getting us to the moon. Now, Artemis 1 is the first integrated flight test of NASA's deep space exploration systems. That's the ground systems here at Kennedy Space Center, the Space Launch System, or SLS rocket, and the Orion spacecraft. We will send an uncrewed Orion spacecraft farther beyond the moon than any of the Apollo missions before it. For Artemis 2, Orion will have astronauts on board as it orbits the moon. Then future Artemis missions will land the first woman and first person of color on the surface of the moon. So Kayla, why do we want to go back to the moon?
The moon's a super interesting place to study. It can tell us a lot about the Earth, its own formation, but also more about our solar system. And we also want to return this time in an international partnership for a permanent presence on the lunar surface that'll teach us everything we need to know to travel onto Mars.
Mm-hmm. And what about for you? I mean, you have the possibility of maybe being selected for those future missions because the Artemis program can choose from any of you guys, any of the NASA astronauts.
It's a crazy time to be a NASA astronaut and even imagine that that could be real. I think we're all just honored to be a part of the team that's doing this. We're just a small representation of all of the amazing human beings around the world that it takes to do something as audacious as returning to the moon, learning what we need to go onto Mars. So we're just all excited to support the program in any way we can. But of course, a ride to the moon would be incredible. So
yeah.
I think we're all just dreaming about those moonwalks.
Now, since Artemis 1 is setting the stage for those future crewed missions, is there anything in particular about this 26-day mission that you will be watching? Is it re-entry?
Yeah, you know, we've mentioned that a few times throughout the broadcast tonight. The re-entry is a really important part of the flight, of course. And the heat shield, we're interested in seeing how it performs in real life. We tested it on the ground, but Orion's going to be coming in faster and hotter than any human-rated spacecraft in history. And so we really want to see how the heat shield performs and make sure all the systems can keep the crew safe for that dynamic event.
Yeah, we'll all be watching for that, too. It's not just about the launch, a 26-day mission, as we said, so we'll be keeping watch over the entire mission. Our workforce now is very different from what it was during the Apollo era. When Apollo 11 launched, there was only one female engineer in the firing room. Today's launch of Artemis 1 is led by NASA's first ever female launch director. Take a look at how she and other women across NASA are shattering glass ceilings.
When I was a little girl, I wanted to be an astronaut,
a scientist,
a doctor,
a fighter pilot.
When I was a little girl, I wanted to grow up to be strong and independent.
When we were asked to draw a picture of what we wanted to be when we grew up, I drew an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon.
All I thought about was when I was going to get to NASA.
It's a huge honor to be NASA's first female launch director. To be the launch director for Artemis, NASA has so many wonderful women pioneers, so many heroes to me.
Some of the most amazing women in my eyes are people like Katherine Johnson and the other women that you've seen in Hidden Figures.
Sometimes it's difficult to believe that I'm on this side now wearing this blue flight suit with all of the other astronauts, representing this iconic image that had so inspired and excited me my entire life.
Being of South Asian heritage, Kalpana Chawla was just such a big thing for me growing up.
I've always looked up to Sally Ride and Mae Jemison, who really laid the foundation to allow people like me to be in the position that I am now.
All of these women were pushing those boundaries and breaking those glass ceilings.
Now, of course, there are some fantastic women in leadership positions that inspire me every day.
So much has changed since the Apollo program. During the Apollo 11 launch, we had one woman, one out of 400 engineers in the room. And I look at our team today, it's much more a reflection of the world that we live in.
A big piece of why it's so important to have women and diverse backgrounds, because it allows us to bring everybody along with us on this journey.
It doesn't really matter what you look like. If you've got the brains and you have the knowledge, we need you at the table.
We are at such an exciting time in human spaceflight right now, and Artemis is such a huge part of that.
We haven't been to the moon in many, many years. We have a lot of younger generation
folks that have never seen that happen. We will understand so much more about the moon, about the Earth, about our solar system.
We're going to stay. And to me, that's an amazing idea. The moon is going to be the blueprint for how we go to Mars and out into the solar system and maybe beyond.
It is incredibly exciting to be part of this Artemis team. It still feels pretty surreal to think that I might one day walk on the moon.
To see a woman and a person of color on the surface of the moon, to be able to say that space is for everyone and that we go to space to make life better here on Earth for everyone. I know that tears will be in my eyes.
My message to women and girls out there is to find your passion, whatever that is.
Don't let anyone tell you what you can do or can't do. Only you can realize your dreams.
Space is for everyone. And if me being in this role helps to send that message, I think that's a great thing.
And I just actually love that I don't feel like a woman at NASA. I just feel like a person at NASA.
The women of NASA are Artemis, and we make a difference every day.
I am NASA's Spacewalk Office Hardware Manager.
I'm the Program Scientist for Space Biology.
I'm the Director of NASA's Johnson Space Center.
I am Artemis.
I am Artemis.
私は Artemis です. Yo soy Artemis. As som Artemis.
Anna.
Je suis.
Ich bin
I
Artemis.
am Artemis.
I am Artemis.
I just love the way that that video ends with you and all these other women saying, I am Artemis. What do you think? Why is it so powerful to just hear those three words, I am Artemis? Why does that resonate so much?
I think it just represents how far we've come since the Apollo era and how we take advantage of the incredible diversity our country has to offer. Having seats at the table for everyone, spaces for everyone. You heard that a few times in the video, and I think we're proving that out every single day in our work, not just at NASA, but with our international partners. I think it's so important to our ability to succeed on these really complex missions.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful video, and I'm glad that people got that message, young girls in particular. Another person who you saw in that video is Pam Melroy. She's a former astronaut and NASA's deputy administrator. So why don't we head over to Jasmine Hopkins, because Pam is there with her now.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yes, I am honored now to be joined by Pam Melroy, NASA Deputy Administrator. This is just a fantastic night. And we just saw that powerful video with you among so many of the great women here at NASA. What is so important about us now being ready to send, the first woman, the first person of color to the moon?
Yeah, I loved watching that video. Just inspires me. So many of those women are my friends, but also they're just such fantastic engineers and scientists and just so many roles at the agency. I've always thought one of the strongest teams that you could ever find is a family. And families have men and women. And so our teams are stronger, I think, when we have that balance and that diversity. So that was exciting. But for me, I was a part of the Apollo generation, and I was very inspired by, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins on Apollo 11 and all the Apollo astronauts. I just cannot even imagine the inspiration, though, for a little girl. I mean, it never occurred to me that I wanted to be an astronaut, but of course there were no women astronauts then. I think what's going to happen now with the Artemis generation is that first woman and the first person of color is just going to have a huge impact on the next generation.
Right. We are just watching with bated breath, and I know that it's going to mean so much to little kids to look up to them. And we understand, too, this is a huge, when we launch Artemis, it's going to be a global accomplishment. Mm-hmm. We have the Artemis Accords, which are helping us make sure we explore peacefully. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, it's really important, actually, especially because unlike in Apollo, where it was actually just a few countries that had the capability to go to space, now those capabilities are proliferating throughout the world. And so what we do with the rocket is really important, and how we go is just as important. And how we go is as teams and with our partners, and with a sense of the responsibility that we have as we go out into the solar system to do it peacefully for scientific purposes, and responsibly.
Right. Pam, you have a great sense of teamwork, and this is definitely not our first time. You know, there's a lot of things that go into testing out a first-time vehicle. There's actually dynamic activity going on right now. So how does this first flight test of SLS compare to other first times, you know, with Shuttle or with Saturn V before that?
Well, I can do even better as a test pilot,
Right.
So there's a history there. In fact, the amazing thing about this is first flight of a first aircraft, you actually taxi it out to the end of the runway and then run down the runway and come back and check all the data. And then you might take off once and go around the pattern and come back and land. This is a little bit like taking off and going to fly a full mission on your very first flight of an aircraft. And so everything has to be right. So this compares it's very similar to the experiences that all new rocket developments have, where, it's not just about learning the hardware, that's a big piece of it, but it's also about gelling that team together and your procedures and how you're going to deal with issues that come up, because they will come up. They always come up.
Exactly. And you have that experience as a test pilot, but also as a former astronaut. In that video, we saw you getting your induction into the Astronaut Hall of Fame, which is pretty cool. So what is your perspective, or what advice do you have for the Artemis astronauts, those ones that are going to maybe set foot on the moon?
Oh, well, they don't need my advice. I'd love to elbow them out of the way and go to the moon too. But they are fantastic. I mean, I'm so proud of all of our astronauts. I was just talking to Jessica Watkins, who just came back on Crew 4. This generation is prepared, ready, and excited. And I think they're really excited that we're putting science front and center in the Artemis program, too. We're going to learn so much about the solar system from the moon and even about the Earth. And so I think the astronauts are really excited about doing that hands-on science. And they are ready to go.
Right. I know they're ready to go, and maybe you are as well. But Artemis 1 is just the beginning. Then we have Artemis 2 and on. We're learning so much. What do you think about this just forward movement that we're making right now?
Well, it's really important. This is the Artemis campaign is actually part of a multi-decade effort that we're doing right now, which is really with the goal of creating a blueprint for how we're going to explore with humans and do science throughout the solar system. So we're going to learn through the Artemis campaign on the moon, and then we're going to go demonstrate it on Mars, and then the next destination, who knows where.
Right. I mean, we're going so much further than we ever have before. Pam Melroy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Go Artemis.
Of course, go Artemis. Megan, back to you.
Thank you both for that interview. Now, teams over at NASA's Johnson Space Center are also monitoring today's launch attempt. So why don't we go back over there with Leah to tell us what's going on over there.
Thanks, Megan. And you're right. Teams here in Mission Control Houston continue to monitor today's events. Again, they will really kick into action once we have liftoff, and they'll remain on console all the way through splashdown. But quickly, I have to show you something, a little show and tell. It makes me feel like the coolest kid in school. I've got a moon rock here. I hope you can get a good shot of it. It is from Apollo 15, 1971. And when it was brought back to Earth, it was part of a larger rock. In total, it was 21 pounds. This is, of course, a smaller section of that. But we're looking forward to the Artemis program and being able to go back to the moon so that we can continue to gather these kinds of samples, but this time at the lunar South Pole. We've never been there, and we've never brought samples back from that area. So we're really excited to see what might differ in those samples and the ones that we have here. Now, of course, we've got a whole laboratory of scientists that are able to study all of those samples. We just opened some up for the first time earlier this year, so that we're able to test with new technology everything that we can learn about these samples that we brought back now 50 years ago. So hopefully within the next few years, we're bringing some new ones back to use that same experimental process on and tell us a little bit more about the moon. But just had to show this off. Apollo 15 moon rock. We're looking forward to having some Artemis ones here at Johnson Space Center. With that, I will send it back to you at KSC.
You were a cool kid before you even had the moon rock, so. But now you're even a cooler kid. Now, the name Artemis was chosen because in Greek mythology, she's the twin sister of Apollo. NASA's Leo Martin is over at the nearby Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, where thousands have gathered to watch today's launch attempt.
Hi, Megan. I'm actually joined here tonight by a very special group of guests here from Stennis visiting Kennedy Space Center. Why don't you tell me, Ryan, what it is that ties you to tonight's launch?
So we were lucky and privileged enough to be able to test the core stage of the SLS rocket that's going to launch today. We got to green run, which is a full duration hot fire. It's a very historic time for us at Stennis. It was so exciting to be a part of. It was 7 years of hard work by a lot of really great people.
And Jack,
Sorry about just so excited to be here to see it.
And Jack, you were actually telling me that you know firsthand, how much work has gone into tonight's launch. What does it feel like to be here tonight, seeing the rocket fully integrated on the pad, ready to go?
Man, I'm just incredibly grateful to be a part of this history and just really excited to see this thing launch.
And Barry, you were telling me that you know also firsthand, the adversity that these teams have overcome to be here tonight. Do you have a word of encouragement, anything that you'd like to say to the teams all across the United States right now, both at Kennedy and at JSC, who are just sitting in these seats ready to get the rocket launched tonight?
Sure. Persevere. I mean, it's hard work, but it's so well worth it. We spent many hours doing the testing and trying to get ready for this moment, and I think we've forwarded that information to those guys, and we also give them the encouragement to continue on, so we know they can do it.
Thanks so much, Barry, and I think it would be great if just on the count of three, we can give them a great big go Artemis. 1, 2, 3.
Go Artemis!
Back to you, Megan.
That was amazing. And that's just, people who were actually able to come here to Florida. There's many people who are joining us from around the world who couldn't obviously make the trip out here. So let's take a look at some of those watch parties there. Here's Space Center Houston. It's the visitor center over for Johnson Space Center in Houston. And you can see a lot of people there after hours because that visitor center is closed right now. People are waving. I love it. Wow, look at that. Whatever that is, it's
awesome.
amazing.
I don't think I've ever noticed that when I'm at Space Center Houston. Maybe it's new.
I know. But yeah, just look at that crowd. It's really fun to see, again, all these people who are captivated, young and old, by today's launch attempt and the beginning of the Artemis program. I know that they're probably looking at the clock and wondering when we might see the launch today. So lovely to see all those people.
And there's the Space and Rocket Center, where we have a ton of people waving their flags, cheering us on tonight for this incredible launch this evening.
I love that. They totally look like cheerleaders, and they're embracing it. I love it. And yeah, this is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. This is the visitor center over in Huntsville, Alabama. As I've said before, Marshall Space Flight Center there is super instrumental in what the Artemis program is doing. They contributed a lot to the mission, so it's nice to see everyone there. And then here is Airbus in Bremen, Germany. So Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together the company and ESA, they provided the European Service Module, which is an important part of the Orion spacecraft. So we have quite a bit of people there. A more reasonable time over there in Germany. It is 7 a.m. So I'm going to say Guten Morgen to them. Did I say it right? Guten Morgen to them over there in Bremen, Germany. Again, the Airbus company. All right, so let's get another check on the launch team with our Daryl Nail, who's inside there and has an update for us.
Yeah, that's right, Megan. So we are clearly in a delay now. The NASA test director, who's basically flying the ship for the launch countdown tonight, has said that we are extending the hold that we were currently in at T-minus 10 minutes and counting. And so that puts us off the 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time launch. We're now slipping indefinitely into the hold. And NASA test director Carlos Monge saying that we are currently estimating how much work needs to be done before resuming the polling that is supposed to take place 15 minutes before launch. It then goes to terminal count at T-minus 10 minutes. Now we've got an update on the tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Currently 95% filled. We're in topping on that tank. It is the last of 4 tanks in the Space Launch System that needed to be completely fueled up before we launch. Of course, cryogenic tanking, a complex operation that has seen some delays tonight. We had a roughly hour delay after a replenish valve on the core stage liquid hydrogen side required hands-on work by a Red Crew team that went out to the launch pad and tightened down some bolts on the valve and got it fixed before leaving the launch pad, and then launch team verifying that that work was complete. Now currently we're awaiting some work with the range. The 45th Space Wing, which oversees the range here and makes sure that the airspace and the ocean out over the flight path is clear, and also has the responsibility to destruct the rocket should it go off track. They have been working on some issues with their equipment and sending a flight termination signal to the rocket. There is testing that must happen with the flight termination system that was delayed by a bad Ethernet switch. Switch has been changed out, and now the range is looking to start testing their connectivity to the rocket in order to preserve that safety function that they are responsible for. So again, we are slipping now indefinitely into the launch window. We're awaiting the launch team to evaluate just how much time is required to complete the work to get this rocket ready to launch. And of course, when we have a new T0 for you, we'll report that out right away. Megan, back to you.
Daryl, thank you so much. As NASA prepares to explore the moon, here's a look at the spacesuits and tools that will help us to do that.
Watching Apollo footage of astronauts doing geology on the surface of the moon is a really great way to think about preparing for Artemis, for putting people on the lunar surface once again. We learn a lot in how they did science operations on the moon and what it's like to work on the moon. You see them doing geology. You see them taking rock samples, putting in a drive tube to take a core sample. You see them bouncing along the surface of the moon on the lunar rover that they used in Apollo 15 through 17. So it's a great way to help drive technology development for the next generation of spacesuits and geology sampling tools.
There's these facilities that help us train like we are on the lunar surface. You know, these 1.6G offload systems or putting people in the aquatic environment are great ways to train the mobility part, right? Like, what can you do and how different does it feel to be in 1.6G and do these tasks?
We've been training astronauts in geology and geoscience for decades now. The Apollo astronauts had literally hundreds of hours of training in geology before they flew to the moon. It's often said that the Apollo astronauts had the equivalent of a master's degree in geology by the time they flew to the moon. In the intervening decades since Apollo, we've been training astronauts who fly to the International Space Station because when they're on the ISS, they spend time observing the Earth, looking out the window, taking pictures of what they see on the Earth's surface. Now that we're looking at putting astronauts on the surface of the moon, we also take them into the field. We take them to field sites here on Earth that resemble field sites that we expect them to see on the moon.
That's the reason why we take them out into places that are unique, like volcanic landscapes or places that are analogous to the lunar surface, to train them on the scale and fidelity of science that you just can't recreate in these facilities.
And so by combining this classroom and field training, we're able to prep them for fundamentals of geology, the major driving lunar science questions that we have that we hope to address with the Artemis program, and teaching them how to do field work in relevant analog environments.
For just science aspects of developing new spacesuits, can it get you to where you need to go? And then once you get there, can you do the cool science that you need to do? And so that's, can you move effectively and efficiently in the suit to be able to collect the samples or use the tools or the instruments? For the visibility, it's like, can you make the necessary observations that you need to? Or does the suit have the lights on it that it needs to illuminate the surface and make the observations you need to? The lunar South Pole holds tremendous resources that are going to allow us to continue to explore. This is a place that we've never been before. There's so much to be learned from getting boots on the ground and exploring a unique place that challenges us as humans and also helps us develop technologies that make our everyday life that much better.
We think there might be volatiles present at the South Pole. By using these volatiles, we'll be able to do things like create drinking water, create rocket fuel to launch astronauts back to Earth. And so by harnessing the power of the land, we'll be able to help astronauts establish that long-term sustainable presence.
It's human nature to explore. Pushing our boundaries and exploring our universe is, I think, just one of those things that's just stuck in our human nature, and that we need to do it in order to understand the world around us, including our Earth and our solar system.
We just heard there how curiosity is just a part of us. So, with that in mind, why don't we do some social questions? Because some people are very curious to hear what you have to say about their questions. So why don't we pull up the first question here? What are your thoughts on the responsibilities that come with going to space? Obviously a question for you. I am not going to space.
Yeah, the opportunity to travel to space comes with a lot of responsibility. I think for all of us, it's a huge honor to be a part of these teams, and the work we're doing is so critical in supporting scientific discovery on the ground. So on the International Space Station, we're a national laboratory. Our crew executed over 350 different scientific experiments during our 6-month mission. And so when you think about that, it's years of work to get one of these payloads or an experiment on the space station. Yes. And sometimes that's someone's life's work you're holding in your hands and executing. And so being prepared for those moments is really important, and understanding how to bring the team from the ground into solving complex problems. We take that really, really seriously. And of course, we want to share what that experience is like. Only a few people have been able to go to space. And as we commercialize space, as low Earth orbit becomes more accessible, that'll change. But still, it's only available to some of us. So we really want to share what that's like and the perspective we gain from our time up there.
It's really great to see and hear that you guys acknowledge that, right? Like that this experiment that you're holding, that you're working on for 6 months, somebody has been working on literally for years. I mean, I've talked to some scientists and they're saying, oh, this has been my life's work, 20 years of my life's work. So yeah, that was a really good question. I like that question a lot. Okay, we have another one from social media here. Astro Kayla, have you considered what you might say if you had the opportunity to be the first female to set foot on the moon's surface?
No, I have not considered that. If I was in that role, it's something I would take really seriously. I think the iconic words of Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, are something that we all know, whether you witnessed that moment or not, or it happened before you were born. For me, I think we all have that embedded in our psyche, those important words. So I think it's something I would have to think a lot about ahead of that mission.
Yeah, that would be in the history books. That'll be something you're remembered for. Oh my gosh, I'd be so anxious delivering it, even after I've thought of what I want to say, like to actually open my mouth and say it from the surface of the moon. Wow. Yeah. That we'll have to think about that one for sure. Okay, let's see another question here. Oh, why is the spacesuit orange in color?
That's an awesome question that I wish I knew the answer to. Megan and I were actually talking about that earlier when we had Snoopy up here. It's a continuation of the same suit that we used during the shuttle era. And I was kind of hypothesizing that maybe it's to help forces if for some reason when we landed in the water we had to get out of the capsule for some reason, it would be easy to see us. But that I'm going to have to take a phone a friend on that one, I think, to know the real answer. I'm sure somebody will be commenting on social media right now with what the real history behind the orange suit is.
I'm trying to think about it, too. I'm thinking, does it have anything to do with SLS being orange because of the foam
match
insulation?
Your vehicle.
Yeah,
why not?
Maybe it's that.
I don't know.
I don't know. We got stumped. That was our first one that we got stumped on. Do we have another question? All right. If you could name one of the moon's craters, what would you name it?
Oh, man. What would you name it, Megan? I don't know. That's a big decision.
I thought you might say the name of your zero-G grab.
Oh, FOW? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a pretty big responsibility, I think, to name these geological features. And a lot of the craters on the moon already have names. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some that maybe they haven't named, they're too small, or we haven't explored them yet. But a lot of them already do have names. Like, we're going to be exploring the edge of Shackleton Crater as part of Artemis mission. So a lot of them are already named and mapped.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing it back on me. I was like, I don't know. Do you think our parents or husband or fiance are now upset that we didn't say them?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I think they understand.
All right.
These are big decisions.
This is. All right. Last question here, for this segment at least. What will Orion do when it gets to the moon?
So for this mission, Artemis 1, it's actually going to orbit the moon and then go into a distant retrograde orbit. And so it'll get really close as 62 miles, and then go way past the moon and way deeper into space than we've ever been before. So yeah, the Orion vehicle will be checking out all of its systems. We're going to be analyzing that data from the ground, and then we're going to see that it can survive re-entry and a successful splashdown off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, that was a good question too. Okay, well, again, just keep those questions coming. We are entering into this launch window, and we do have time, so we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to try at least to answer most of your questions. So you've been hearing throughout the broadcast all the different science that returning to the moon will enable us to do. So there's actually something called the Prime 1 mining experiment, and that's going to robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface.
NASA's first Polar Resources Ice Mining Experiment, also known as Prime 1, will robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface. Thanks to data from spacecraft orbiting the moon, scientists believe that the polar regions contain water ice in the form of ice just below the surface. With the right technologies, that ice is a game-changing resource that can be mined and used to produce propellant and breathable oxygen for future explorers. Under NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative, the agency selected intuitive machines to fly and land Prime 1 on the moon's south pole. Prime 1 will land near the Shackleton Crater to drill into the lunar soil in an area that could contain water ice. Prime 1 is made up of two instruments, Trident, the regolith and ice drill for exploring new terrain, and M-SOLO, the mass spectrometer observing lunar operations. Trident will drill up to 3 feet into the lunar surface, extract lunar soil, and bring it up to the surface. Trident drills to its maximum depth in multiple phases, stopping at different increments. As it reaches each desired depth, it will pause and retract the drill string to deposit lunar soil on the surface for analysis. This is where M-SOLO comes in. M-SOLO is a commercial, off-the-shelf mass spectrometer modified for spaceflight. It will evaluate the chemical elements and compounds released from the lunar soil for water and other chemical compounds. Trident will then proceed to the next specified depth and repeat the process until samples at all desired depths have been analyzed for water. If no ice is found where Prime 1 lands, NASA will still collect valuable information about drilling into the lunar soil for a future mission. NASA's Viper, the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration rover, will use Prime 1 technology on a mobile robot that will navigate the moon's south pole searching for additional resources. Prime 1 data will help NASA assess lunar resources to inform future Artemis missions and a robust human presence on the moon.
So we are still awaiting a new T0 for today's launch attempt, but for more on what to expect when we launch for this first day, let's go to NASA's Dan Hewitt. He's inside our Apollo Saturn V Center at the KSC Visitor Complex.
Hey, thanks, Megan. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. There's a lot of people here in the complex. I just heard a woo-hoo. People are getting in and out because we have a great view of launch when it's going to happen, and it's going to happen today. But that launch is just the first step in the Artemis 1 mission. So let's look at what's ahead for this historic first flight. As we just said, launch is step number one. Those 4 RS-25 engines throttle up, followed shortly after by the 2 solid rocket boosters igniting, sending SLS and Orion skyward. Now, on our way uphill, we'll have a number of jettison events. You'll be able to see things coming off of the SLS rocket. One of the most visual ones will be these 2 solid rocket boosters. Now, they'll expend their propellant a little over 2 minutes into the flight. They will separate. We'll see them flare off onto either side, and then the core stage continues to fire. We're also going to see the launch abort system come off the top. Once you get high enough in the atmosphere, it's no longer required. You could actually do aborts using engines on Orion and its service module. I will also note that on the launch abort system, it's got those 3 solid rocket motors. The jettison motor is active. The abort and the attitude ones are not for this flight. We don't have people, so we're not flying a fully active abort system. We also have 3 fairings that are there to protect Orion, the service module and the crew module, as we're flying up through the really dense parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Next up, we'll hit core stage separation. So we've got 4 main engines. We'll hear MECO, main engine cutoff. Those engines will shut down. The core stage will separate, drop away. It's eventually going to splash down in the ocean. And that hands over the propulsion duties to this, our upper stage, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS. Its first job is to execute what's known as a perigee raise maneuver. So the perigee is the lowest part of your orbit. You have a perigee, that's your low part, and an apogee, that's your highest point. We're going to raise up the perigee, and that's going to actually put us in a nice circular path around the planet. And while we're there, that gives us time to check out Orion. We're flying it in space for the second time, the first time in this fully integrated stack with SLS. We'll be able to look at all of Orion's systems, make sure those solar arrays are capturing the sun's energy and turning it into electrical power for Orion's systems, make sure the communications are working, all of our guidance, navigation, and control. That is your time to make sure you have a healthy spacecraft before you do something that is going to send it to the moon. And that's next up on our list. That's the trans-lunar injection. For today's launch profile, that's going to be a firing of about 18 minutes of that single engine on the upper stage. Now, that engine optimized for a vacuum. It's producing about 24,000 pounds of thrust. So it's a pretty big engine, and it's doing that because we need enough energy to be able to send our payload, Orion, beyond low Earth orbit and send it on a path
for President of the United States.
Now, after that burn is complete, ICPS separates. It's going to do what's called a disposal burn. So it's going to send itself on a path from Earth around the moon and slingshot out into what's known as a heliocentric orbit. So it's going to completely leave the Earth-Moon system and go into orbit around our sun. But after it separates, propulsion duties get handed over to this, the European Service Module. And it's got a couple of different engines that it's going to be using, and we're going to be testing those out just on day 1. We're going to do what's called the Outbound Trajectory Correction Burn 1. And we'll do a couple of these trajectory corrections as we're flying out to the moon, but that first one is that first critical test of this large engine, the Orbital Maneuvering System engine. That's the one that has the most thrust, generating about 6,000 pounds of force in a vacuum, and that's what's going to be doing a lot of our maneuvers, or giving us that pushing power as we do these maneuvers around the moon to enter into what's known as Distant Retrograde Orbit, or DRO. And that's this dotted line that you see around here. Now, we call it distant basically because of the distance we're away from the moon. We're about 40,000 miles, a little bit less, off the lunar surface. And then we call it retrograde because the moon orbiting planet Earth in this direction, going in a counterclockwise fashion, we're going to be entering into a clockwise orbit around the moon, opposite retrograde. Now, to do that, we're going to get in close. We're going to dip in off the lunar surface. We're going to be about 80 miles, 80 statute miles off the lunar surface as we do this outbound powered flyby. Again, the major thrust coming from that Orbital Maneuvering System engine. After we do that, we'll do a final maneuver to actually go into that distant retrograde orbit, that DRO. Now, why DRO? Why are we not just going around the moon and coming back on like a free return trajectory, which we did on some of the Apollo missions? Well, in DRO, it's a very stable orbit. It doesn't require a lot of fuel to maintain that area around the moon. So it gives you a lot of time to really test the spacecraft. If you followed with any launch of a new spacecraft, you know there's only so much testing you can do on the ground. Once you actually put all of that hardware in space, in the environment that it's going to be operating, hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth, you're going to learn things you didn't even realize about everything from communications, the life support systems, the thermal control. Everything on a spacecraft needs to get put through its paces in this environment before we put people on board, and that's why we're heading out to DRO. Eventually, though, it's going to be time to come home, and we will do a DRO departure maneuver. This, again, firing up that orbital maneuvering system engine and others on the service module, and this is what's going to commit us from leaving the moon and heading on back towards Earth. We'll dip in once more close off the lunar surface, slingshot and use the lunar gravity to do this return-powered flyby, and then similar to the way out, we can make correction burns as we kind of fine-tune our path back towards the Earth. And then it's time for re-entry. A couple of things happen before that. One of the really critical ones, spacecraft separation. We're going to detach the European service module shortly before re-entry. Its job largely done. That burns up in the Earth's atmosphere and reveals on the crew module the heat shield. I circled it earlier. This is goal number 1 of the Artemis mission. Artemis 1 mission is testing this heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we make that trip around the moon and we come back, we are going in speeds of excess of 20,000 miles an hour. So when we slam into the Earth's atmosphere, it's going to heat that thing up to more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For the Artemis 1 profile, we're going to do what's known as a skip re-entry. So basically, you can come in too shallow and skip off the atmosphere, too narrow, and you're going to do what's known as a ballistic entry, which really heats things up. We're going to do kind of a mix where we're going to skip once off the atmosphere, and that we're still going to get the heat, but that helps to reduce some of the G loads on the crew. Once you're through that, you get to parachute deploy. There's 11 parachutes in total that are going to slow Orion down before it splashes down. We're going to be going from 20,000 miles an hour to about 300 miles an hour before those parachutes deploy, and then they do a final job of getting it in the water in the South Pacific. We've got these big orange balloons. That's an uprighting system, so even if Orion landed in the water upside down, those can inflate, and they put us back upright into what's known as stable 1. That's where you want your spacecraft to be, nice and upright in the water, especially if you're an astronaut in there floating. Now, we also have a large U.S. Navy ship with a big bay that's going to basically come up and swallow Orion into its deck, and you've got a couple of other assets in the area to help recover hardware, the forward bay cover, parachutes, things like that. But that's scheduled to happen 26 days after a launch today. So that's 26 days from liftoff here in Florida around the moon to a splashdown in the Pacific, and that will be the first mission in the Artemis program, the farthest we've ever sent a human-rated spacecraft in history, and just the first step before we put people on board. So that's a look at everything still to come. We're counting down to that launch. I'll send it back over to Megan and the team at the host desk, guys.
A very comprehensive look at that. Thank you so much, Dan. If you're just joining us, welcome to Kennedy Space Center and our live coverage of Artemis 1, an uncrewed flight test that will return us to the moon in nearly 50 years. But you know, some might ask, why the moon? Well, here's why.
We are going. The history of this agency is marked with broken barriers, once viewed as impossible. With science fiction turned reality, with innovations that have spun industries all their own, and with demonstrations of peace for all humankind.
We soar in the skies of our home planet. We maintain a human presence just outside of gravity, and we touch points all across the solar system and beyond. We're going back to the moon, and this is why.
The moon is a treasure trove of science.
It holds opportunities for us to make discoveries about our home planet, about our sun,
and about our solar system.
The wealth of knowledge to be gleaned from the moon will inspire a new generation of thought and action.
Without fail, every major program and mission NASA has invested in has led to technologies and capabilities that have shaped our culture.
The breakthroughs of the Artemis era will define our generation and the generations to follow.
The tens of thousands of jobs associated with propelling us to the moon today are just the beginning of a lunar economy that will see hundreds of thousands of new jobs develop around the world.
This is not an ambition of one entity or one country. The exploration of the moon is a shared effort,
woven together by a desire for the greater good.
Why the moon? Because the missions of tomorrow will be sparked by the accomplishments of the Artemis generation today.
Because the ambition to go has already begun.
And because Mars is calling. We need to learn what it takes to establish a community on another cosmic shore. So let's camp close before pushing out.
And so, we go to the moon now, not as a series of isolated missions, but to build a community on and around the moon capable of proving how to live on other worlds.
We'll use the lessons from more than 50 years of peaceful exploration to send a new generation to the lunar surface to stay.
We will anchor our efforts on the lunar South Pole to establish the Artemis Base Camp,
positioning us for long-term science and exploration of the lunar surface.
We will prove what it takes to assemble a complex ship in deep space.
We will perfect descending down to and returning from a distant surface.
We will learn how humans can survive and thrive in a partial gravity environment.
With improved spacesuit designs, mobile habitats, and with reconnaissance robots pre-positioning and relocating supplies.
We will learn how to utilize the resources we find on these other worlds, starting with finding water ice and purifying it to drinkable water.
And refining that into hydrogen for fuel and oxygen to breathe.
We will establish fission power plants on the surface of the moon, capable of supporting a growing community of efforts.
And we will expand the logistics supply chain to enable commercial and international partners
to resupply and refuel deep space outposts.
None of this is simple or easy, but nothing in our history ever has been.
The Eagle has landed. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This kind of continuous lunar presence is a natural extension of all that we've learned in low Earth orbit. And what we will accomplish there will ensure the monumental missions to Mars are within reach. As we ready the launch of the first Artemis mission, and as commercial companies ready their lunar landers for the first private payload deliveries, we have already begun to take the next step.
Throughout this launch broadcast, our NASA's Leah Martin has been introducing us to people over at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex who have come out for hopefully the maiden voyage of Artemis 1. People from near and far, young and old, just really excited to hopefully see this historic flight. So now she's joined by somebody else who has a really interesting story. Leah, tell us about it.
Megan, I think one of the most exciting things about being here tonight is being with people who are like-minded, who have such a strong tie to the history of our nation's space program and their love of spaceflight. And I actually struck up an amazing conversation with Scott here, and you were telling me about the special tie that you have to tonight's launch as well.
Oh, yeah. I literally grew up with NASA. My father went to work with the NACA before NASA, went to work for Dr. Von Braun, followed him over to Marshall Space Flight Center, and became, when it became NASA, he worked on the Jupiter C, Redstone, Saturn 1, Saturn 5, and then because of that, he brought me here to see Apollo 11 launch. So that was my first launch. I was 5 years old. I loved it. Still remember the sound. That's about all. And then years later, through my flying career, I was able to bring my sons back with my friends that flew the shuttle, and they saw 5 launches and 4 landings. But basically, I wanted to be here. I was here for the first moon launch, the last moon launch back when Uncle Gene Cernan, our family friend, went to on Apollo 17. So I wanted to be here for this because it's kind of in our family, in our blood, and hopefully I'll be around for the next one when we go and land again. So that's
Incredible. So you have NASA actually in your DNA, grew up with the program.
Yeah. I knew most of the German scientists. The kids sat in our lap, Dr. Ernst Stirlinger, and my father flew with von Braun because he was a general aviation pilot as well. So they'd get off work and fly, and they were in Life magazine together, National Geographic. So it was fun. I literally got to knew Al Shepard, all the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo guys, and it was an honor. I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but I went a different route, and but I can still come here and see them.
We can, and we're so grateful, so thrilled to see you here tonight, and so excited that you will be able to actually compare the last launch and the sound of the last one with the one tonight. It's absolutely going to rock the sky.
I want it to be even louder. I want to feel it. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to meet you, and Megan, we're going back to you.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a fun story. Here we are now at Space Center Houston. This is a live look inside of the visitor center there. Lots of people hoping to see the launch today. I love this guy in the front with his NASA shirt representing. And again, just seeing children and young and old, just all these people who feel captivated and are excited about our next giant leap into deep space. So glad to have them here. Oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah, the team in Marshall and Huntsville there is always ready for their shot, waving their flags. They're super pumped. That's the home to the SLS program office, so they have a dog in the fight tonight, seeing Artemis launch for the first time.
Is that an inflatable astronaut in the center? Do you see that? I think somebody is dressed up as an astronaut.
Look at that.
Yeah,
they're representing.
Ready to go. I love this. Yeah, I'm so glad that they're there. Again, these visitor centers are closed to the public, but the people there decided to hold a watch party.
Oh,
and
look,
that's
our
exciting
friends in
to see.
Germany are ready for us this time.
I know,
they
clapping.
anticipated the delay. They look pumped and ready to go.
So these are employees of Airbus. Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together they provided the European service module for the Orion spacecraft. So really, we should be applauding them. They shouldn't be applauding. Thank you so much, guys, for your contribution to the program, and can't wait to see Orion and SLS launch. Okay, so now let's head back over to Daryl Nail over with the launch team so we can hear any updates about a new T0.
Yeah, Megan, thank you. And a clearer picture is starting to emerge as the launch team now reports out that they only have a few minutes left of work to do before they're ready to pick up polling. And we're also hearing that some of that polling, which kicks off with the mission management team, is also now just about 3.5 minutes away. Now, we are currently still in that hold. But the launch team, NASA's test director, is continuing to move the team forward. We've wrapped up work on the upper stage and the lower stage. You're looking now live inside Firing Room 1, where Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson is overseeing her launch team. We've had a number of delays that have put us off the T0, but we are starting to track to a T0 close to around a quarter till, top of the hour. But we do need to have some polling that takes place. I'm pausing now because I'm listening in to the teams as they communicate. In this launch window, which we're currently 26 minutes into, and it's 2 hours long, it runs until 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time, we have what's called 40 cutouts. And in those cutouts, they range from about a second to about a minute. These are times where they can't launch. These cutouts must be accounted for when determining a new T0. The upper stage of the rocket, which was the last to get ready and configured. Just recently, the team cycled the liquid hydrogen valves, which is required. And they are currently working on the LO2 valves, liquid oxygen valves in the upper stage. That work is almost done. We are now a minute and a half away from the poll of the mission management team, which is several minutes before T-minus 15 minutes. When that poll starts, we'll get a clearer picture of our T0. NASA's test director has informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 232. And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there. Whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one. Just heard from NASA test director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch. Great news. Again, no constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch. Okay, NASA test director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close. We're going to pull up the audio now so that you can listen in.
LPs go. And rockets go. All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll. And it's attention on 232. This is the launch director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Copy, LWO. And mission manager. And mission manager, launch director.
Launch director, mission manager on 232. The mission management team has been pulled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, launch director.
Go ahead, launch director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Copy, launch director, and thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD.
CVSE here.
Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time.
In work.
NTD.
RSR here.
Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from launch director.
Early.
Getting ready to get that new T0 time. The poll that you heard was the NASA test director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock. GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
Okay.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
We are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The L-minus 15 poll complete.
Show 06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
Oh, 1:47:44, 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time and 44 seconds. We went straight into terminal count. Liftoff now 9 minutes away. So terminal count. Control has been given over to the GLS, the ground launch sequencer, a computer and software that is doing all of the commanding and monitoring of the Space Launch System. We'll hear call-outs from the GLS operator, Alex Pandalos. As well as NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding. GLS is pre-tensioning the umbilicals at this very moment. You can see them as they run down the rocket. That's getting them ready to detach. At liftoff, those arms will swing away. We'll let go of the rocket in a clockwise direction. T-minus 8 minutes and counting. The GLS is performing up to 100 commands per second, including configuring ground systems for power transfer to the rocket. GLS is turning on cameras, recording video inside and outside the crew module to collect data for engineers. Purging the aft skirt booster with high flow nitrogen. Clear out any hydrogen gas that may be there. You can see the crew access arm is already retracted. When there is crew during Artemis 2, it would happen at T-minus 6 minutes. But out of abundance of caution, they went ahead and retracted the arm well ahead of liftoff. Want to point your attention to the base of the mobile launcher. If something wasn't done to reduce the power from the pressure caused by the rocket's ignition and thunderous sound, it could damage the rocket. So the ignition overpressure and sound suppression system will flood the mobile launcher with water. You'll see that sequence start at T-minus 17 seconds. Now coming up in less than 30 seconds, the ground launch sequencer will start bringing the high energy systems online, starting with core stage pressurization. Firing room 1 is completely silent as they listen for the next call.
GLS is go for core stage tank pressurization.
The core stage tank is now pressurizing to flight levels. The replenish valve to the liquid hydrogen tank now closing. The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion ascent pyros and transfer to internal power. The launch abort system, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the flight termination system, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
The flight termination system is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS is go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues. T-minus 4 minutes, 15 seconds. Up next, GLS fires up the KPUs. Those are high-speed turbines which provide pressure to hydraulic pumps that steer the RS-25s. Stands for Core Stage Auxiliary Power Unit Start.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
That now leads to the thrust vector control test at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That can proceed now, and we will see the engines gimbal at the bottom of the core stage. At T-minus 3 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear the go for purge sequence 4. That's a helium purge of the 4 core stage engines downstream of the propellant valve, getting the air and moisture out.
GLS is go for purge sequence 4.
And in just a few seconds, GLS will close the core stage LOX vent, liquid oxygen. The white vapor cloud caused from the super cold gaseous oxygen condensing the water in the atmosphere will disappear. You see it coming out there now. And there it goes, it's closed. LOX vent closed, pressure rising in the core stage LOX tank to flight levels. Coming up in 15 seconds, look for that thrust vector control actuator test. Engines will gimbal. And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability to steer the rocket into space. They will operate at 109% performance each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All four, 2 million pounds. Altogether with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS is go for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
GLS is go for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
GLS is go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. 5 minutes and 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour. Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff. And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff. Orion is now in Earth's orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about what it was like to hear the rocket roar off the launch pad. Megan and Kayla, I've got to hear all about it.
Well, if you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we just watched Artemis 1 launch, our first step towards our next adventure into deep space. As Leah said, I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. And I'm kind of still giddy and speechless. I don't even know how to explain how I'm feeling right now.
I feel the same way. This is the first launch that I've been able to watch in person. And I've got to say, it was incredible. It took my breath away, and I was tearing up. Just what an amazing accomplishment for this team, this international team, people who have been dedicating their careers to getting this rocket off the ground and taking the first step to getting a crew on that vehicle back to the moon. It was just incredible.
Yeah, this is a moment I think that we're all going to remember where we were when we saw this sort of thing, you know what I mean? And it was great to see, again, when we entered into terminal count, everybody here just started cheering, coming out to get a really good view. And boy, I mean, it lit up the night sky, and it just shook everything around us. Did you feel that? Like in my bones, I felt that.
Oh yeah. The cool thing is just kind of the delay between what you see and what you hear, because of course the sound travels a little bit slower, and it was just amazing. The ground shook. We could hear the thrust pushing that rocket into space. 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
Yes.
It's incredible. It was amazing to see here live in person.
How does it compare? So this is your first launch on the ground. How does it compare to your launch when you're in the capsule soaring towards space?
I mean, equally emotional, I think. Yeah. We train for everything, and so when we're in that capsule waiting for launch, we're just running our procedures. You could almost trick us and say that we were in the simulator and it wasn't real. But like in that moment of liftoff, when the thrust builds underneath you, like we saw it today, it's just hard not to be overwhelmed by the emotional experience, the excitement, the joy of that moment. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think we can't say it enough. This team really deserved this moment. They've been working so hard for this moment. When I heard that we got into terminal count, it was, I felt a sense of relief and excitement for them that I think everybody here did. We really wanted them to succeed. We really wanted to see the launch today. And wow, I will never forget this.
Me neither. It was an incredible experience to be here and see that happen.
Yeah. Was there anything that was particularly surprising to you? Again, this is your first launch. What were you expecting?
I think we also had a nighttime launch for our launch. And so I think one thing you underestimate is how much it lights up the night sky.
Yes.
We were able to watch it all the way through that trajectory. We were able to see the boosters separate and everything. So it was just an incredible view. It's amazing how much you get to see of the flight path when it's at night and it's lighting up the sky.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, but we see the moon here, and the trajectory of the rocket looked like it was flying towards me. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my God, that's so poetic. It's so beautiful. I'm so glad we launched today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations to the team. It's incredible.
We're going to head over to Daryl, who was at the launch team. Daryl, you got to count us down through that, through liftoff. I mean, how was that being in the launch control center with them?
Well, Megan, it was something else. I got to tell you, you're looking live inside the firing room where Charlie Blackwell-Thompson is about to address her team after a whole lot of hard work and preparation to get to this moment. Let's stand by and listen to her now.
Comm check. But you can't hear it in the room. Can you guys hear me? No. website can hear me, but the room can't. The room can't. You can hear me? Because the guys. I don't know what he's telling me to do. My team can't hear me, so I'm. Yeah, somehow the team can't hear me with the mic, so I don't.
He's here.